Board through the Washington State Recreation and Conservation Office. Basically, it's a state funds that provide money for restoration projects that benefit salmon, trout. So a little bit of background on the Pend Oreille. Most of you probably know all this stuff already, but when I originally created this presentation, it was for a different conference, so I didn't change it too much. But obviously, we're up in the northeast part of the state. Back in the 50s and mid 60s, there were 3 different dams that were put in. Boundary Dam up near the boundary with Canada, which provides power for Seattle City Light. Box Canyon Dam, which is the PUD dam, and then Albany Falls Dam just across the border in Idaho, which is largely used to regulate the water in Lake Pend Oreille or in Sandpoint. So before these dams were put in place, the river was free flowing. You know, it rise really high in the summertime and go down as the flow went up before summer. Excuse me. Drop in the summer, you know, whatever. It was a regular river. These dams pretty much changed it into a reservoir system, as you can see from the picture, which was taken just right out here. You know, it's very useful for people. Great for power, great for recreation, great for living on those kind of things. Not so great for native trout, particularly because it creates really slow water that makes it really, really warm in the summertime. And so what we wanted to try and do was see if we can somehow help these native trout that live out here during these warm summer months when the water is very, very warm. So a few years ago, there was a couple different papers that were published. The first was by Mejia et al. And basically what they did is they went out and they put a whole bunch of temperature loggers at the mouths of pretty much every tributary between Albany Falls and Box Canyon Dam to look at the differences between tributaries coming in as far as temperature goes and then the main stem Pend Oreille. The other was a paper by Garavelli et al. Who looked at many of the same locations, but they were looking at usage of West Slope cutthroat trout and bull trout of these tributary mouths during the summer months. And so what Mejia et al. Found, this is a table that shows some of their results, not every single place that they had, but basically what they found is most of the tributaries that are coming in are colder or considerably colder during the summer. And summertime, I'm talking July, August, into kind of mid-September. Considerably colder than the main stem Pend Oreille. And so the box in red is our 2 sites, and it's might be kind of hard to see, but right in the middle of those lines is a dot. And that's represents basically, you know, the average temperature. And so we have temperatures that are in 12 or 13 degrees Celsius. We do everything in Celsius, but if you need Fahrenheit, you double it and add 32. We'll give you a pretty rough idea of what it is. As opposed to the Pend Oreille up in the upper right, which is well over 20 degrees. You know, it's approaching 24, 25 degrees C, which is near the 80 degree range. And then there's a couple kind of long solid line and dash line. Those are the kind of limits for bull trout and cutthroat as far as what they can handle. And so basically, we got this nice cold water in these tributaries, and we have this really warm Pend Oreille. So that may sound like great. We got these cold water. What's the big deal? If we look at it from a kind of scale issue, Indian Creek, which is one of our sites that I'll talk about here in just a second. In the summertime, it's got a flow of about 3 CFS or 3 cubic feet per second, which is just a way to measure, you know, how much water is moving, as opposed to the Pend Oreille at the same time frame, which is 10,000 or more CFS. So really cold water, but as soon as it hits this giant river or reservoir, you know, it just dissipates, and it's really of very little use to these fish because it just disappears pretty much. So that's kind of the temperature side of things. We have cold water, but you know, maybe fish can't utilize it because it's just kind of disappearing when it hits the Pend Oreille. On the fish side of things, Garavelli et al., like I said, they looked at fish usage of these sites, and they used radio telemetry, which is basically a tag that you stick in a fish, and then you can track it with a radio antenna. But they put them in a bunch of bull trout and West Slope cutthroat, and then monitored where they went. And again, the red box is our 2 sites that we worked on. And what I really wanted to highlight is that in the yellow spots is that both bull trout and cutthroat were using these sites. They tagged, I want to say, around 20 fish total. And so if you did look at the rest of the table, which is kind of busy, there are other sites like LeClaire Creek, for example, up north of here that did have more usage, but both of these sites were being used by these fish in the summer, and in an attempt to escape this hot water. So just a quick note: bull trout and cutthroat. They used to use the entire Pend Oreille system for their life cycle. So a lot of them would rear in Lake Pend Oreille, and they'd actually move downstream and up into the tributaries down here, LeClaire Creek, Scoopin Creek, whatever, to do spawning, and then they move back up. And so they, historically would use the actual Pend Oreille River, not just the tributaries, for spawning purposes, for rearing purposes, that kind of thing. So before we did this project, we went out with some underwater cameras, set them up at both sites to try and see if we could document any fish that were using these sites. And we got a whole bunch of pictures of fish: sunfish, bass, perch, tench, suckers. We had one brown trout, which isn't a native fish either, but at least it's a trout. But not to be outdone, some of our other fish biologists were out and doing electrofishing, like Scott was talking about earlier, and they actually visually sighted this bull trout at the mouth of Indian Creek. And I don't know for sure, but my guess is they visually sighted it because the water at Indian Creek in the summertime is about that deep. And so it was, half out of the water or so. But they were able to collect it. It had previously been tagged by a Vista over in Montana. And so as a juvenile, so it had actually moved. This is kind of a little bit of a side, but it actually had been born up in the Noxon Reservoir, moved downstream all the way through Lake Pend Oreille and all the way down here to be caught by us. So just the point of that, I guess, is besides being size, to show that these fish they're trying to use the entire system, even though it's still very hot. That's just what they do. This guy, it's kind of hard to tell from the picture, but I mean, he's a good sized fish. So fish are using these spots. There was I should have mentioned it a couple slides ago. One of the graphs. One of our sites is called Duncan Springs. I'll get to it in a second here. But on the graph, it's actually called Char Springs, which is an old name for it because historically bull trout were considered char, and people used to see char at these spots all the time, and that's where it got its name. So moving on to our locations. Again, this presentation was created for people who may not be from the area, but we have two different locations, Indian Creek and what we call Duncan Springs. Indian Creek is on the upper left circle, and a lot of you probably have driven by it numerous occasions. It's right off of LeClaire. And then about a mile or so upstream, which is south, is Duncan Springs. Indian Creek is actually it's a creek. Duncan Springs is actually a couple of small seeps and springs that come out of the side of the bank. And we'll get into each of them here in just a second. So here's a before picture of the mouth of Indian Creek during low flow. So, about this time of year, maybe into August. And Pend Oreille is on the bottom. Indian Creek's coming down. There's kind of two distinct channels, really wide delta, devoid of any sort of pretty much anything. No cover, no structure. The water in most of these channels from about, who's this pointing here? From about here on up, like I said, is probably, normally maybe 5-6 inches deep at the most. And then it comes out into the Pend Oreille proper. And as I mentioned before, it's got about 3 CFS or so in the summertime. So pretty low amount of water. It is a spring-fed creek, although it's a creek, not just like a seep, but it is spring-fed, so it stays relatively constant temperature-wise year-round, which is kind of cool. Before we do the project, we wanted to do some modeling to see what we might get out of doing a project in general. And so this picture up on the upper left shows some temperature modeling of what the water temperatures look like prior to construction. And so the blue is cold water, the red is warm, and then colors in between, it varies. And then down below that on the little kind of graph shows the basically the depths of the water before implementation of the project. And so we have a total of about 154 square meters of suitable cold water, which meant it was space, and I should know this, deeper than something like that. So very, very low cold water area. A lot of space as far as maybe acreage, but just very little suitable habitat for fish. I'll go on from there. So what we were proposing to do is basically try and pool up this water at the mouth. The idea being that if we can keep it from kind of dissipating out into the Pend Oreille and have a larger area for fish to utilize, then maybe they'd be able to take better advantage of it instead of being a bull trout that's half out of the water, trying to stay in some cold water. And so this is the project that we came up with help with NHC, which is a consulting company that helped design it. And basically the idea, I'll use my pointer here, is we have a couple different channels coming down. These kind of like little roads with some structures in between to slow water down, provide cover, that kind of thing. But the big one down here at the mouth is building this big giant spit that sticks out so that when the water is low during the summertime, the cold water can pool up behind it and not be influenced by the Pend Oreille, which is out here. And of course, we did some more modeling to see what potentially we might come up with as far as cold water area. And the big takeaway here is we came up with a difference of about 1,644 square meters, which probably doesn't mean anything to a lot of people, including myself, but it's about 0.4 acres or so of cold water. And maybe even more important than that, maybe, is the depths of this cold water. And so if you look at the graph, or not the graph, excuse me, the chart, we have a lot of depths that are at, half a meter or a meter, 3 feet or so. So much deeper than the 6 inches that we had prior to the project. So we started construction this last September. We got a little bit of a late start, mostly because the water levels decided to stay high for longer than we were hoping. So here's just a couple pictures of some of the log structures going in. On the left-hand side, it might be a little hard to see, but they have a fancy GPS that's pinpointing exactly where we wanted to put some of the stuff. We got some of the log structures going in. The right, the lady standing there is one of our archaeologists. So the mouth of Indian Creek is a very culturally significant area for the tribe. And so we had strict rules that, basically we can't uncover anything or unearth anything, which working in the creek wasn't a huge issue necessarily, but we wanted to make sure that nothing like that happened. So we were able to complete the project without running into any sort of cultural artifacts that would cause a major delay in the project. Here's an overview picture, pretty close to the end of construction. We got the kind of the light tan colored areas are basically like burlap that goes over some of the structures that we built. You can't quite see the spit on the bottom of it, because it goes off the picture, but kind of gives you a general overview. I'll have another picture here in just a second. So here's the completed project. Water actually has come up on this picture, so the spit, as maybe you can tell, is mostly underwater. This picture was taken in around the beginning of November or so. And then we have it for comparison to what we were hoping to achieve as far as how it looks. So it turned out pretty darn close to what we wanted, which is good because that's what we were supposed to do by all our permitting and whatnot. This wrapped up right around the middle of September. We were really pushing so water levels typically rise back in middle of September, and we kind of put in a really nice request to the Army Corps to postpone water coming over Albany Falls, and they agreed that it was okay. So we kind of got an extra week or so out of it. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't have gotten it done. So it was we're very fortunate that we were able to. One of those lessons learned is, we had a contractor doing most of this work, so it wasn't all up to us, but we were pushing the envelope as far as time goes. So the other project that I want to talk about, a very similar project, it's called Duncan Springs. Same general idea, trying to pool up this cold water for use of trout. Indian Creek, the mouth of it is actually owned by the tribe. So that was very nice as far as permitting issues and access and that kind of stuff goes. It's a little easier. Duncan Springs is on private property, but we worked with the landowner on it. He was very, very gracious to let us do almost anything we wanted. He had a couple requests and whatnot that we worked with him on, but other than that, it was very similar. So the difference here is instead of a creek, it's a series of springs or seeps, and you can see a couple of them in the upper left hand coming in just off the bank. There's one right here. There's one right here. The other ones are upstream and they kind of pool up into this pond that has this failing dam on it. And so one of the things that we agreed to with the landowner was that we would keep the dam, but replace it with a proper one. That's something that if we had our say, we probably wouldn't have kept it in there, but we wanted to work well with landowners. So we'll kind of go through a similar idea. Here's a couple before pictures. You can see the failing dam in the left-hand picture. There was a small outlet in it, came through this culvert. That was the main outflow for the impoundment. You get to the next picture, I think it is. Yeah, you can really see this little meandering little stream here, if you want to call it that, or outflow of the dam, is all the cold water coming out. And it's reflected in our chart over here, about 18 square meters of habitat. I mean, it was this wide, it's 2 feet wide, and you could step over it. But like I mentioned, there was fish that would nose up into that in the summertime and try and take advantage of it as best they could. So again, we did our modeling, very, very little amount of suitable habitat or cold water. We came up with a very similar idea for Duncan as well as that we did to Indian Creek. Spit coming out, redo the dam. The main difference here is that we wanted to put in a fish ladder, if you want to call it that, that went in and out of the impoundment. So we got rid of the little culvert in the dam and put all the water diverted all through our little fishway. And the original idea behind that was that this area seasonally gets flooded and fish could, in theory, hang out in this pond, and then the water would recede and they might get stuck in there. And we wanted them to have a chance to get out. However, one of the kind of benefits of it is that the way it's designed, fish can actually swim up it and get into the pond if they so chose to. So when we get to our modeling here of how much area of cold water we thought we'd get, it's about 273 square meters, or about 0.07 acres. So much smaller scale than Indian Creek was. But that didn't include the pond. So if you include the pond, that wasn't part of our original plan, you actually get closer to that kind of 0.4 acres or so. So it opens up a fair bit of cold water for these fish if they so chose to access it. And so again, a couple construction pictures. The lower picture was working on the dam. And that was pretty cool. I'd never worked on building a dam before, but basically you kind of build this trench in the middle and compacted it really well. And then kind of made almost, and it's kind of like a footing of concrete for a house in a sort, but it was all made out of clay. Had to have the clay that's the right consistency, excuse me. Not too wet, not too dry, that kind of thing. It was kind of neat. There's just a couple pictures. And then our overview picture, again, taken at the end of October, early November, relative to our plan. Turned out, again, pretty similar to what we were hoping, so that's encouraging. These sites wrapped up, like I said, kind of in, the end of September. And Indian Creek, we were able to get out and do all planting and everything on it. So we planted a bunch of native vegetation, grasses and willows, those kind of things. Excuse me. Duncan Springs, we weren't able to before the water came up, and so we actually finished that up this spring. We were actually out there the day before the water started rising. I mean, we planted some willows, and the next day they were all covered in water. We thought, oh shoot, are they going to survive or not? And we were out there a couple days ago, and almost all of them. We didn't count them all because we put in several hundred, but and they all appeared to make it through the water, which was nice. So as I mentioned, these projects, we just did them last year. The water has just kind of come down now low enough that we can get out and actually start doing some monitoring on these. And so we were out on Tuesday, I believe it was, checking water temperatures to start with. And we were just going out with a kind of a handheld thermometer, checking top, bottom, of the water column. And at Duncan Springs on the bottom left, basically everything in our pooled up water. So from where to go here, from the dam all the way out to basically the end of the spit here, was right around 13 degrees Celsius. And the Pend Oreille was 21 already, and it's not even warm, the lowest water yet. So there's a huge difference in the temperatures. And then the same thing with Indian Creek. It was 11 to 13 all the way out to the spit. So all of this stuff in here, everywhere we measured, 11 to 13. And then again, right on the other side of the spit was 21. So we have some pretty extensive temperature loggers that we're going to put in actually starting on this coming Tuesday, to monitor this, all the way through middle of September, and get some better idea on the temperature. We have a drone that has thermal imaging abilities, and so we're going to be using that weekly as well to try and measure the temperatures. And then we've just started, because again, the water just came down low enough to do this, but we just started doing some fish surveys. The guys that were doing it actually were in Yellowstone most of last week, so I wasn't able to talk to them about how they were doing it. They haven't seen a lot yet, to be honest. But again, the water's even though the water's warm, it is just kind of dropping. So we're kind of in that beginning change where we'd expect to see fish starting to utilize these areas more. But we're either going to use electrofishing or snorkeling to try and figure this stuff out. Kind of depends on what works the best. And there was another thing that I was thinking about on this morning that I wanted to mention on this slide, and for the life of me, I can't remember what it was. So maybe somebody will bring it up in a question, and that can spark my memory or whatnot. But anyway, the projects, they seem to work so far. Really encouraged to see the differences in temperature, that it is cooling up and it's not just getting incredibly warm or something in there. So that's a good sign. We're halfway there. We just got to make sure that the fish will utilize it, which I'm sure they will. We just gotta be there at the right time to see them. And I think that's all I have for now. Kind of an overview of the projects, but anyway, I'm sure a lot of you probably seen the Indian Creek when you drive by on the Clare and maybe wonder what the heck was going on. So now maybe you have a little bit more information on what it is. And with that, if there's any questions, I'll do my best to try and answer them.
How far do those fish? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, she's right behind you.
How far do those fish go that Indian Creek spawn?
So Indian Creek has fish all the way up. So Indian Creek is about, I think it's only like 4, maybe 5 miles long before you hit the top. But it's not a real long creek. And there are fish that go all the way up it. Indian Creek itself, it's actually considered bull trout critical habitat, which is kind of a fancy word for saying that bull trout should or did use it at one point in time, as far as the Fish and Wildlife Service is concerned. We have not found, that I know of, any bull trout in the creek itself, but we found them at the mouth as they're making their migrations back and forth. There are quite a few brown trout in Indian Creek, which, while not a native fish, are a trout, and they're not as a big a concern for, at least for the tribe. So that kind of answers your question. Not really. I mean, bull trout, any fish could make it all the way to the top if they wanted to. The historical bull trout spawning areas, which, like the big guy that we saw would have been working his way back and to or from, are the Clare Creek, Ruby Creek, Cedar Creek. Indian Creek should be, as far as temperatures go. I mean, they like really, really cold water, and those are some of the coldest ones we have. But we haven't seen them upstream very far, to be honest, as far as bull trout go. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, because I've hiked up there by geophysical.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, the water's pretty cold up there, but I haven't seen any fish. I just wondered if there would be like an opportunity for like a mini hatchery or something where you actually plant.
So, yeah.
Spawn and run up and down.
Yeah, so the Seattle City Light is actually constructing a hatchery. It's primarily for West Slope cutthroat trout right now. They're doing it at the old WDFW hatchery, Kings Lake Road. But they have plans to, it's still being built. Like I think it's supposed to be operational this fall. But they have kind of a second phase that they're planning on doing with trying to rear bull trout. And the idea is to be able to kind of do something similar to that. So it may be possible, it may be something that happens in the future, that there are fish put in places like that potentially. So I think, did you still have a question before we get kind of, so everyone's in a straight line here, but.
Me?
Yeah.
Are they going to plan to do more of these along the river then? I mean, if this is being.
Thank you. That is, yes, that's something I meant to mention. So these two sites were two of the coldest, and they were two of the most easily accessible as far as getting access, landowner agreement, that kind of thing. So the thought is, yes, hopefully these will be successful. Again, the idea being that as an adult trout is migrating, say, from wherever it's going to, whatever stream, it can kind of like leapfrog between these sites during the hot water. So there's a few other sites, like Skookum is one of them that down here that has pretty cold water. It's got a lot of land ownership kind of at the mouth, so it may not be able to be done. There's a few that are north of here, like Ruby Creek, Lost Creek, Renshaw, kind of up in more in the Ione area, that have cold water. They might only have one landowner at the mouth of it that, they may be receptive to it, especially if we can show that, hey, look at, fish are using these things, which we haven't done yet because we just started. But, so the idea is hopefully that we can do more of them and they are successful. But that remains to be seen based on, a lot of it is land ownership. Some people are really adverse to wanting someone to come in and mess with their property, and I can't say I blame them necessarily. And other people are more open to it, and some people just take some persuasion or whatever. So yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So there was the fish barrier in the Clark Creek Road there. So through federal transportation dollars and collaboration between the tribe and DOT and other folks, have an opportunity to realign the Clark Creek Road because they have that steep curve. But at the same time, gave the county, Monterey County, the opportunity to remove that fish barrier, which created a whole lot of habitat access to maybe that gentleman's question. Because before it was between your project and the river and the Clark Creek Road, there was a fish barrier there, so it couldn't go west slope cut road or maybe even a bull trout at some point. Didn't have access to that before that project and so forth. And I just want folks to be aware of that. Monterey County as a lead agency, looking out for habitat, collaborating with other agencies, are really trying to improve the habitat situation for fish along the river. So I'm good on that.
Yeah. This is just, for those of you who don't know, just upstream is the bridge. I think it was 2018, I believe, was when it was replaced. That was actually just before I got here, before I started. Not that it matters too much, but I think there was one. Was there one other question back there? Or no, Scott?
Do you have big monitors off at either site?
No. Okay. We are going to put in some cameras that are, they're only going to be able to monitor a small little location. We're still kind of trying to figure out the monitoring side of things. But currently we don't have any pit tag readers in them. Duncan Springs wouldn't be a bad spot to maybe put one. Indian Creek would be a little tougher just because of, being, unless it was way up higher where it becomes more of the creek, but.
Pit tag monitor.
So a pit tag monitor is basically, there's little tiny tags that you can stick in fish. People do it for their pets. It's the same idea. It's just a little tag, and then you have a scanner that you can scan. And so our scanner in this case basically is an antenna that goes across the creek. And so as the fish swims through the antenna, it picks up the tag and it'll tell you whatever information that you decide to put on the tag. So where it was caught, where it was tagged, who did it, whatever else is on there. So it's a way to monitor or track fish and see where they're